The gods of Olympus have abandoned me. Now there is no hope.
And Kratos cast himself from the highest mountain in all of Greece. After 10 years of suffering, 10 years of endless nightmares, it would finally come to an end. Death would be his escape from madness.
Welcome back to True Score, the show where we take a game and boil it down to give you a completely objective score and if it will be socially acceptable for you to like it or not. My name's Toshio, and today we'll be looking at the original God of War from 2005. That's right gamers, this series actually did exist for a long time before they copied Marvel and made it about Asgardians and Frost Giants. Directed by David Jaffe of Twisted Metal fame, God of War was developed by Santa Monica Studios as a PlayStation 2 exclusive in mid-2005. Back when it released, God of War was known as a hack and slash action game, but in today's day and age, we have a better genre that fits the title. God of War is a slightly more basic kind of character action game, sharing more in common with other action titles such as Devil May Cry and Bayonetta. I myself have only previously played God of War 1 and 2, and with Ragnarok coming out in just a few short weeks, I thought this to be the perfect time to revisit the series from the start and experience the history of this beloved game series. This is not about my story, however. This is the story of a man, a myth, perhaps more, by the name of Kratos. So let's take a look into the story of the first entry in this long-standing, historic series. The beginning hour of our game here sets up the premise of the story well. We start with a CGI opening of Kratos casting himself off the highest mountain in all of Greece and into his apparent death, only to cut to 3 weeks before this event occurs. This sets up the premise that this is not going to be a happy story. There will not be a good ending here, and sets intrigue for the player on how our journey is going to take us to a place like this. The short tutorial level shows off a good amount of Kratos' character and sets up what our goals are for the game's journey. Ares, the god of war, is laying siege to Athens with his own personal army. The gods, largely Athena, want Ares dealt with, and Kratos seeks forgiveness from the gods for something in his past that haunts him, something that causes him to have his own wish to kill Ares. The deal is sealed, and Kratos' journey and ultimate fate is put into motion. This may sound like an interesting beginning to a game about God versus God, man versus God, perhaps even man versus man, but this is where I'll have to disappoint you, dear viewer. After its introduction is done, you spend an overwhelmingly large majority of the game just playing through levels, fighting Ares' minions, and doing puzzles with almost no story or narrative advancement at all, except for the very occasional flashback into Kratos' past and the events that led him to become the man he is in this game. Kratos is armed with the Chains of Olympus, dagger-like blades attached via chains that seem to be dug into Kratos' very own arms, and ghostly white skin and a large red stripe. The game very quickly establishes that Kratos is not a character to be liked or admired. He's not a hero, he's not here to save people, he's just a very angry man with a lot of guilt, and is more than willing to sacrifice others in his quest. I am pleased to report that in the late sections of the game, the plot does pick up a bit again, and does a good job of building up hype, but if you wanted a strong plot about the Greek gods and their machinations, I'm afraid this game will more than likely leave you wanting, even after its roughly 8-hour journey. Honestly, for me personally, one of the biggest narrative disappointments with this title is that for a game by the name of God of War, there is a shockingly little amount of gods fought. Let's see if this changes with later entries in the series. Enough about the story for now, let's talk about the things you do fight and how said fighting is. So we have ourselves here a relatively early entry into the character action genre. At the time of release, the major competitor was Devil May Cry, and that series' third game had only just come out earlier that year and blown the lid on what the genre could and should be. It's understandable you'd be curious about how the combat and gameplay is in this at the time new series on the block. The honest answer is that God of War has satisfying and well-functioning combat, but is a much more mechanically simple game than its competitors in the genre, and since it lacks much need for mechanical depth, ends up feeling considerably more button mashy. You have a light attack, a heavy attack which is mostly used for combo enders and you can hold for aerial combos, a grab button, jump, a block which works as a parry after some leveling, rolling, magic skills you can use, and in typical character action fashion, a super mode you can kick into for when the enemies are tossing you around more than your high school bully does. Starting with combos, you typically chain multiple light attacks to stun enemies and finish the combo off with a heavy attack as an ender, which is where the majority of your big damage will be coming in. As you would expect, the combo changes depending on how many light attacks you've done before your ender, and the enders tend to be slower and harder hitting the more light attacks you've done before using your ender. There is more variation in the moveset, some heavy only combos, some unique combos that work differently, some moves that involve holding block and then pressing the face buttons on the controller, but these are only obtained after leveling your weapons significantly, which I will get into later, and these moves have a bit of a problem. It is nice that the game offers some variety in the combos you can use, but almost all extra options end up becoming useless as soon as you get them due to how the enemies work. Just as you can block, enemies can too. And when they do this, the only good way to open them up is to try and land a combo ender before they attack you first, which means that an overwhelming amount of the game time boils down to spamming light, light, heavy to open an opponent's guard, then just spamming light attacks into the latest heavy you can do to land a metric butt ton of damage. You could use other more flashy moves, but you'd just be shooting yourself in the foot since nothing else is going to be as useful as what I just mentioned. This gets very repetitive quite early, and makes the game feel a lot more basic and simple compared to others in the genre, where combo types always have their time and place. Thankfully, there are some extra systems in the combat that help keep things engaging. Below your health bar, you have a bar for magic, which you can expend on magic skills you get from several gods as your adventure progresses, such as an area of effect attack, a ranged attack, one to turn enemies to stone for easy kills, and one to call upon spirits to help damage enemies near you while you attack them. I'm not typically the kind of player to use extra systems like these and usually roll melee only, but I actually found myself using them a lot in my latest playthrough as a way to shake up the battles, and some skills worked very well at countering very specific enemy types when I didn't feel like dealing with their shit. There aren't a lot of different kinds of magic present, but for the first title in the series, I feel like they nailed the absolute basics, and I'm excited to see what extra magic skills I'll be getting in future games. In the early game, the magic uses up quite a lot of your bar, but thankfully, it'll never be too long before you're full again thanks to the chests that are absolutely littered throughout the game. Across the journey, you'll see a few different coloured lights coming out of these chests, and the colour of light will denote what you'll be getting from it. Green chests will fully restore your health, blue chests will fully restore magic, red chests will give you a bit of extra XP, and chests with white light coming out of them will give you one of three things. You could get a ton of XP from them, or you could get something a little more rare called a Gorgon Eye or a Phoenix Feather. These items serve to permanently boost your health bar or your magic bar, and you have to collect 6 of the eyes to increase your health, or 6 feathers to increase your magic. Therefore, it always pays to keep a lookout and explore each level for secrets and hidden breakable walls, just in case there's something good nearby. I've mentioned the XP system a few times now, so I may as well go into that for you. In standard action game fashion, as you kill enemies and break objects and find the right chests in game, you'll accrue red blood-looking energy called XP, which you can use in the pause menu to either level up your weapons or your magic skills. The higher and higher combos you land on your enemies, the more XP you'll get for killing them, so it really does pay off to play your fights well. As you level up your weapons and magic, you'll do more damage with them, unlocking new moves to use, and for the magics, you'll often lower the cost of using them, meaning that in the second half of the game, you can really go ham with it since the cost is lower and the blue magic chests are still overly abundant. I do have one criticism of the XP and leveling system, and whether or not it's an issue for you is going to depend on if you like to get a different experience every time you play through the same game. I mentioned that all weapons and magic can be upgraded, but by the time you start nearing the end of the game, the chances are high that you're going to have nearly every single thing fully upgraded. This does a great job at making you feel like an unstoppable badass rampaging your way through the God of War's warriors, but means that on a second playthrough, you're not really going to have any different builds or playstyles, since you're going to end up having everything fully upgraded again anyway. It personally doesn't bother me, since I'm the type to only replay a game once enough years have passed that I've forgotten a lot of the game. But for a lot of other people, this could be a real problem, especially compared to this game's contemporaries, like Devil May Cry 3 and the playstyle variety that it offers. Thankfully, even with this being such an offense-heavy and slightly mashy action game, there are still several ways to play defensively. Kratos has a block on L1 that does a really good job at stopping incoming attacks, and can be cancelled into from short attack animations but not long ones or combo finishes. After some upgrading from Kratos' main weapons, the Chains of Olympus, if you block at the exact right frames that an enemy attack is coming in, you'll be able to perform a parry and get in either a horizontal or vertical counterattack depending on the button used. This provides a fun and satisfying risk-reward system, but I've found that if more than one enemy attacks you at the same time and you parry one attack, you have no choice but to just eat the second attack, since you don't have enough frames to block or parry the second. Your other form of avoiding damage is to roll, which is mapped to the right analog stick. Why, God, oh why would anyone ever map dodge to the right analog stick? Rolling does do a good job of sending you a fair distance away. It's not a small dodge at all, but it is unfortunately only 4-directional, meaning you don't have great control over where specifically you want Kratos to land. And if you roll towards the enemy, you're just going to end up getting caught on their model instead of rolling past and behind them. I will give this game some real props. For the first entry in the franchise, and with the game being as short as it is, I'm pleasantly surprised with the amount of enemy variety. Yes, there are a few reskins, especially in the later parts of the game, but you have some solid enemy archetypes here to vary it up. From undead soldiers, bigger, sturdier minotaurs, massive cyclops with large AoE attacks, agile gorgons that can turn you to stone, and honestly a lot more cool enemy designs that I'll leave for you, dear viewer, to find. One thing I really do enjoy about the enemy variety is that each type makes you play the game differently. Some you want a quick guard break, some you need hit and run tactics for, and some just have strong magical counters. In typical fashion for this style of action game, along the way Kratos will unlock a super powered up mode called Spartan Rage that you can activate once a gauge fills up. This mode stops Kratos from being staggered as easily and gives the player a massive boost to damage dealt, so make sure to use it only when you're in a real pinch. The last real option you have in combat that I haven't covered is the fact that you can grab enemies with the circle button. Grabbing low tier enemies opens them up to being killed with either light attack, heavy attack, or pressing grab again, and will dispose of the enemy fairly quickly, but the downside to it is that you get absolutely nowhere near the regular XP for the kill. So it can be a bit of a double-edged sword. A lot of the larger or more menacing enemy types will get a grab prompt above their heads when their health drops down low enough, and you'll get a pretty sweet animation of Kratos killing them brutally, while giving the player a QTE to perform or make the player mash a button for a big kill. Different enemies give different rewards for achieving this, such as Minotaurs only giving health when killed this way, so sometimes the smarter option is actually to ignore this if you want regular XP instead. I do like the fact that there's an element of choice here, instead of it being a guaranteed win button. The game did seem to have a fairly large problem with this mechanic, however, when I played through it. A lot of the time, the giant grab prompt would be right above an enemy's head, but if there were any other targets in the arena at all, Kratos wouldn't know what to grab, would often grab something next to my target, or even go for the correct target, but the sequence wouldn't actually trigger, and I found this quite frustrating and inconsistent. The next point that I'm about to mention isn't necessarily a negative, but I am surprised by how few boss fights are in this game. There are some boss fights that are very well done, very dynamic, and honestly a spectacle, but these are very few and far between. I think I could count the amount on one hand. I do like that all the boss fights in the game were well done and they didn't insert any filler bosses, but I am looking forward to later games in the series having more unique bosses on offer. In fact, combat will only be making up about 50% of your total playtime within God of War. I have to say, I'm genuinely surprised by the amount of puzzles the game offers. Whenever you aren't in combat, you'll pretty much always be platforming through fun levels or solving puzzles, and I like that about the game. None of the puzzles are ridiculously tough, a lot of pushing blocks into or onto things, pulling levers, but it does add to the ancient Greek theme, making you feel like even in Athens and other places, you're looking for hidden treasures lost to time. The platforming is relatively basic. It is more or less just basic exploration, jumping between platforms and running along rafters, but we'll see what the series does with it going forward and if it keeps platforming a staple of the franchise. Now that we've talked about platforming and puzzles, let's talk about the levels themselves and how the game stands up visually. So, we've talked about what you do in the levels, but one of the biggest questions is how are the levels? I'm glad to say that they're pretty decently designed and very varied, even if there aren't too many of them. Over Kratos' quest, you'll be fighting on ships, in Athens' city streets, sewers, temples, deserts, mountainsides, and even more unique areas within these larger zones. every area in the game has quite a different color palette and visual design, so you won't be getting bored of an area or look before you move on to the next one. I do appreciate how even if sometimes you're not changing physical location that much in-game, they were able to make you feel like you were going to new places just through scenery changes. Visually, the game can have some really pretty areas or some really flashy dynamic bosses like I mentioned earlier, but compared to other games from 2005, God of War does not push the boundaries of graphical fidelity. I don't necessarily mind this though. The game by no means looks ugly, and since a large majority of the game has you fighting large groups of mob enemies, it becomes really hard to push visual fidelity while retaining a high frame rate, something which is considerably more important for a game in the character action genre. One aspect of the game has unfortunately massively failed from a visual standpoint, however, and any of you viewers who have played other games from this era likely know what I'm going to talk about. Yes, this game uses pre-rendered cutscenes. The higher and higher modern resolutions become, the worse and worse pre-rendered cutscenes become, especially when you may or may not have used a way to play the game on a PC at 4K. That's about all for the visuals. How about the sound? God of War does a good job at having a good, well-fitting soundtrack. I can't quite put my finger on what it is. It might be the amount of trumpets and drums, but the whole soundtrack has a very epic, dark, and mythical feel to it. Apparently the entire soundtrack's like an hour long, but I'm gonna be honest, all I vividly remember is drums and dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun-dun. But I mean, that means it was memorable, right? As far as sound effects go, I think the game did really well. Item interactions have satisfying sounds, attacks can be very easily understood if they're effective or not by the sound they make upon hitting the enemy, and you can very much tell when you're attacking a hidden or breakable wall. The voice acting is so ridiculously goofy, with everything being greatly over-exaggerated, but I think it works for a game with Greek gods and a main character whose only character traits are guilt and rage. This has ended up being a much longer review than I originally planned, so it might be time to start moving on to the closing thoughts. One final thought is that God of War has a difficulty problem. Easy is actually brain dead. On normal, I only died from puzzles. I'm not kidding, literally 0 deaths in combat. On hard, I was spending up to an hour stuck in certain sections, and I didn't even attempt the final unlockable difficulty mode. In closing, God of War 1 does a really great job at supplying the player with a strong theme of fictional ancient Greece. The level variety, enemy variety, magic, plot of revenge on gods, and soundtrack give you a really solid feel for the entire journey. The gameplay and amount of narrative are where we do get let down, however. The gameplay isn't terrible, and it doesn't feel bad to have hands-on with the controller, but for the first game in the series, it is definitely lacking depth, and I hope a lot of features such as the parries and rolling get smoothed out for later entries, because at this point, the game is only particularly fun when you can go all out offense, but then there's no reason not to just button mash basic attacks. I would like to see when we get around to subsequent games if we get better pacing with the story and more frequent changes in level variety. I feel a little harsh on this one today, but I've got to be honest. I can see that if the series got the issues I've noted sorted out and improved, it could be a very fun series to play. But for now, I'll be giving the original God of War 1 a true score of 6 out of 10. That's going to be about it for the review, lads. I know I haven't done a game review in quite a lot of time now, but I'm going to make sure these are regularly uploaded again frequently, with a lot of focus on new releases. The main reason for the lack of reviews has been that I became a full-time Twitch streamer, so hang out with me in the community there, we'd love to have you. If you enjoyed the review and you want to hear my takes on more games going forward, throw the video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching everyone. Catcha.